number 10 we have the Wandering Witch. Something that farms are always really good for is cheap labor. You have some kids, and as long as you keep putting food in their mouths, you can keep sending them out to the field to push plows. I can't think of a better reason to have kids. Soft slavery. Beautiful. The Wandering Witch is someone who would want to take advantage of this exact situation. It's said there's a witch who would travel from farm to farm at night, looking for children who should be asleep but have stayed up too late. She offers them a break from their daily work, a break from working super hard and waking up early to rake leaves and milk cows. She tempts them, and if your will is weak and you give in to her offer, she'll take you into the forest and you'll never be seen again. What does she do with these kids? One endless rave with no curfew? No, she slits their throats, drains their blood, and then uses it to keep herself young. Hey, we're all out here trying to stay hot. Get it, girl.
Next up at number 9 now, we have The Creepy Farm. I found this story on yourghoststories.com, and as soon as I saw the title, I knew it was right for this video. It was written by Angelus Crudus, who said, "I've been reading stories on this site for months now and love the hair-raising creepiness of them all. I moved in with my husband 4 years ago. He lives, and now I do too, on a 100-acre farm in West Quebec, Canada. The house is small and used to be a hunting shanty, then added on to make a lath and plaster house. It's over 150 years old and has 2 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs, complete with slanting ceilings. My husband bought the place off the guy whose family has lived there since it was settled back in the day. The man's father was a drunk, and when we were cleaning up the place, we found hundreds of liquor bottles hidden all over the outside buildings. The first creepy thing that happened was the knock at the door. It was a clear knock, 3 times. My dog even barked, but when I went to the door, no one was there. We are the only house on our street, and our nearest neighbor is a mile away at least. It isn't like it was kids playing a prank on us. My husband and I didn't say much about it. We don't like to call attention to whoever it is that lives in the house with us, because we feel like if we leave it in peace, it will do the same for us. The next thing happened when we were cleaning the drunken old man's tools up in the barn. There was a huge saw blade about 4 feet across, used on old tractors. There was a 9-inch nail in the wall, and the saw blade was hanging on it through the holes in the middle. My husband was under it cleaning up some dirt when it fell off that nail and hit him on his hand. He was wearing leather gloves and so was unharmed, if not unnerved. The nail was so long someone would physically have to move it away from the wall for it to fall like it did. Then just the other week I was doing the dishes and reached to the cupboard to put a plate away when the cupboard opened on its own for me. It was so weird, like someone wanted to help me with the dishes. I didn't say anything about it to my husband as it freaked me out, but 3 minutes later he saw someone walk by our window. Of course, when we went outside, no one was there. It was very strange. Then a couple of days later, the lights flickered on and off. They did this several times, but when my husband went out to the breaker box, nothing was wrong. He even went through each switch and turned them off then back on to make sure. When he got back inside, the lights flickered again. It was only the lights on one side of my house. The whole thing is very strange. Moving on to number 8 now, we have voices. This one came from Ori15 on Reddit, and it's a little reminder that it's not just houses and castles that can be haunted. He said, "A couple with a ranch let me volunteer for a summer. I just wanted to learn how to care for horses and play cowboy. Well, they called me out and asked if I would do the evening feed for their animals while they went to visit their family in a town that was about an hour away. I said yes and got started. So I was alone with a bunch of horses and dogs. All of the horses were pinned up. I had not even let them into the pasture yet. The sun was still up. It was the opposite of a creepy time. Well, it took a left turn to Crazy Town when I walked into the barn and I heard people started talking. I was all alone. Nobody at least a mile in any direction, and almost no way anyone could sneak in to mess with me. The voices were very low and unclear, so I have no idea what was said. The only reason I know I'm not crazy is that the dogs that followed me in acted like they heard it too. One started barking at where the voices came from, and the other started running around the room growling." Moving on to number 7 now, we have the zombie horse. That title might give away the main theme of the story, but you don't get to say zombie horse very often in life, so I just took my shot there. Reddit user P. Verplogen said, "I grew up in a large suburb outside of Houston. It was during the early 90s when a lot of farmland settled by the original German immigrants was being brought up by developers and turned into new homes. My family lived at the very end of our subdivision, and past my house was a great expanse of farmland flanked by thick woods and old decaying wooden shacks from the 1800s. Every day on my walk home from school, I would pass by a particularly overgrown old shack, which I guess must have have at some point been a house, which leaned like it would fall over at any minute on its tired old foundation, and just beyond it was a long row of fences. It was my daily commute to and from elementary school, and I'd walk by it, pick up interesting rocks and things, and I never really thought much of it. There was always construction while the subdivision was expanding, so they had dug long trenches for what I suppose was for a sewer and erected electrical lines through the farmland. Beyond the fence was a small lake, which I had often snuck in to explore and catch frogs, but after an encounter with a water moccasin, which is a species of pit viper, I decided to stay clear of it. The farm had cows which would meander through the meadow and one large black horse. A storm had rolled in during the previous night, and I remember that the clouds were so thick and black that it felt like night when I had arrived at school. It didn't take long before the storm was in full force and the power had gone out at school. Our teacher decided to have us all sit together on the floor and read to us for the rest of the day, which was fine by me. The storm had passed, but the darkness lingered on when I got out of school. I walked down the now muddy path in the strange darkness, past the crooked house and beside the aging fence, each step becoming more and more difficult as the mud collected on my shoes. That's when I heard a thrashing. The cows weren't there, but I remember clearly that old black horse. I remember thinking that it was sick or injured or something. Its black coat was slick and steam was rising off its body in the cold air. It was kicking its back legs wildly and violently slamming its face into the muck. It had a weird look to it, not like it was panicking, but like it was calm, and it didn't look like it was out of breath. Again, it slammed its head into the mud and kicked out its legs, then shook its head from side to side furiously. I stopped to watch it. Looking back, I wish I had just kept walking. I remember that after a minute or two, it stopped and looked up at me, the grime sliding off its face. It must have been in a matter of seconds because I had no time to react, and the horse had charged towards me. It didn't jump over the fence, but instead lowered its massive head and tore through the gap between the fence boards. The wood cracked and splintered as its muscled body strained and its long neck extended through the gap. The horse savagely lashed out and started snapping at me. With its entire body covered in huge swollen muscles, it would recoil and then slam all of its weight back into the fence, attempting to break the boards. It did that again and again. Its enormous broad teeth came inches from me, and I fell out of my shoes backwards, leaving them stuck in the mud. It's a miracle that the fence was holding it back. I could see it clearly now. The horse was burned badly. The skin around its mouth had been seared off, and tendrils of pink bloody skin snaked its way over its face like a spider web. The absence of skin made its teeth seem even larger, its black gums exposed, and its mouth frothing with spit that I could feel hitting me in the face. At that moment, I was absolutely terrified that this horse would kill me. I remember wanting to get up, but a thick mud had me trapped. I also remember the smell. It was like sulfur, a mixture of wet animal, burned meat and singed hair. But what has stuck with me the most were its eyes. They were cloudy like black ink poured into milk. As it struggled to reach me through the fence, its nostrils flared, and I could feel the heat of its breath on me, its teeth snapping shut over and over. The clacking noise of the heavy teeth slamming together was deafening. I left my shoes and ran home. I remember my mother screaming at me about the mud when I stormed in. I told her about the horse that had nearly killed me and that I had left my shoes there in the mud. She grabbed me by the arm and was going to make me take her back there to get them, but I cried and screamed not to go, so she went alone. When she got back, she had my muddy old sneakers in her hands, and she told me that she saw the horse. It was dead. A farmhand was dragging its body behind a tractor, and he told my mom that the horse had died earlier that day. One of the power lines that had been installed running through the meadow was knocked over during the storm, and the horse must have been near the lake because it had been electrocuted and killed. He said that it had died instantly beside that lake when the power went out hours ago. Next up at number 6 now, we have the 7th barn. The story goes that there was once a wealthy farmer who owned a lot of land in Ohio. He built a new barn on his property every time his wife had a baby. He named the barns after each of his children, and by the time this story takes place, they had 6 kids and were expecting number 7. However, the farmer's wife died in childbirth, and so did her unborn baby. The farmer went insane with grief and couldn't tend to his farm. The family had no money and the farm started going under. Then, on one night, in the depths of his madness and despair, the farmer took an axe and led his children out to the barns where he murdered them one by one. He buried each of their bodies in the 6 barns that had been named after their births. Then the farmer went to the 7th barn where he hung himself. As the story goes, all of the barns were eventually torn down and the land was sold off, all except for the 7th barn. Nobody wanted to buy the land because of what happened there, so it was abandoned and soon fell into disrepair. They say if you go to that barn at night, you can see the ghost of the farmer hanging from the rafters, his body swinging back and forth in the wind, dwelling on his terrible crime for all eternity. No one was ever really sure where the 7th barn was located, although it's definitely in Ohio. Some say it was the Kranz farm in the Cuyahoga Valley, and others say it was at the top of the world in Northampton. In 1997, a local Ohio teacher claimed that, after a lot of research, he had finally managed to track down the real location of the infamous 7th barn. He said that none of the barns had actually ever been torn down. The land had just been divided up and sold off, and the barns had simply been incorporated into neighbouring farms. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the figure. This one was submitted to ghostsandghouls.com by one of their readers. They said, I live in South Africa, and this is where my story takes place. Me and a friend of mine, whose name is Berend, were travelling through the countryside on our way to a small town called Delaryville. We were used to small towns and country areas as we grew up there. However, I had never experienced anything like this. As we were driving, bad luck struck us like a hot iron and both tyres on the left side went flat. His car was a piece of junk. We were soon on the side of the road at 2 AM with only the full moon to light the area around us. There was no civilization nearby, only local farmhouses far away. So I decided to leave Berend with the car and walk on to find any entrance to a local farm. I walked for about 2/3 of a mile and at last found a gate. The gate was short and could easily be scaled. It was locked with a chain, but I still climbed over in desperation. I could see the houses light in the distance, so I walked along a gravel road towards it. As I kept walking towards the house, I heard a very loud boom. At first I thought it was cannon fire, but it couldn't be, as there are no military bases around that area. I only heard this once, but decided to move on. Now the skeptic would obviously have an explanation, and I'm not saying it was cannon fire, for it could have been something else, but it pretty much sounded like an old type cannon. What could make a sound like that at 2 in the morning? Anyway, I continued. Now the countryside was a wide open landscape. There were only fields of grass for miles and miles with little quantities of trees. So about 20 meters from the side of the gravel road, there stood a big tree. As I said, it was around 2 AM and only the moonlight was shining, but something stood underneath that tree. A dark figure was just standing there, facing me. It looked like a human figure, so I was immediately struck with fear. I thought there must be some explanation for whatever was standing there, so I kept walking. When I looked behind me again, it was gone. How could something that big disappear so fast? I immediately turned around and ran away, back towards the main road. I told Berend, but he never believed me. Later on, I found out there were skirmishes between the local farmers and the British Army in the Anglo-Boer War in that area. Next up, number 4 now, we have the BALDOON mystery. This is a legendary story that came from a farm near the town of Wallaceburg, Ontario, Canada. In the 1830s, a man called John MacDonald bought a prized piece of land. Many people tried to buy it off him, led by an old woman, but John would always refuse. One day, some of the women in the MacDonald family were talking and working in the barn when suddenly a pole fell from the ceiling. They put it down to a freak accident, repaired it, and thought nothing more. Sometime later though, a second pole came crashing to the floor, this time quite close to them. They couldn't figure out what was going on. Not long after, a third pole almost crushed them. Scared for their lives now, they ran out of the barn and into the house. This was the start of many strange accidents that plagued the MacDonald family. The family heard strangers in their kitchen at night. Bullets and stones were thrown through the windows until every pane was broken. A visitor was hit by a stone in the kitchen. He threw it in the nearby river. 5 minutes later, the same stone landed in the kitchen again. There were fires too, starting all over the house, sometimes even on the roof. A psychic told them that they had to shoot the wing of a strange goose that was near their home with a silver bullet. John MacDonald did that, and then a while later he saw the old woman who wanted to buy his land. She was sitting on the porch with a broken arm in a sling. From that day on, the mysterious happenings came to an end. Moving on to number 3 now, we have Creepy Farm 2. Do you guys remember that story earlier that I simply called Creepy Farm? Well, I found a sequel to it, shared by the same person, Angelus Crudus. They said, it's been almost a year since I shared my first story on here, and for a couple of months after I wrote it, our house was fairly quiet. Not so now. To give you a general layout of the house, it has an old front door which has been glued shut for many decades now with a a small porch and stairs outside of it that are falling apart and have a big pine tree growing through them. Beside this glued shut door is our front window. Our house sits maybe 10 feet from the gravel road in the front. On the left hand side of the house is our driveway with a deck and side door towards the back of the house. We use this as our main front door. Once inside this door there is a small porch with another door that leads into the house proper. The house is very small with one large living room that is our kitchen and also a living room and stairs leading off of the living room and two small bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs complete with sloping ceilings. Our front window looks out over the road and has quite clearly had a bit of activity. In my first story I related how my husband saw someone walk by this house. Well, this has now become an almost weekly occurrence. I have seen it also. It looks like a short person wearing a white shirt or blouse casually walking by that window. This has so far only happened during the day. Then last week my husband and I were watching TV on the couch in front and sort of to the side of the window we started hearing muffled conversation coming from the window. Our house is the only one on this rather long gravel road and our nearest neighbour is about a mile away. It was very strange, so I muted the TV and we could hear distinctly two men talking to each other out there. As we listened, the conversation turned into an argument with both men raising their voices. It was muffled and we couldn't really make out words, but it was clearly happening. I was too nervous to go outside and check, but I did go to the window. I could only see the nighttime darkness of a new moon out there. The catalyst for me actually sharing this story happened 4 days ago on Saturday night. Our bedroom runs the length of the house upstairs and because of the slanting ceilings we have our mattresses on the floor with a chest of drawers at the foot of our bed separating our room in two with the door just beside this chest. Anyway, we had just gone to bed and I was reading for a few minutes with the lamp on when all of a sudden both my husband and I saw a shadow of a rather tall, large man walk into our room and into the back corner. As I type this I have goosebumps all over my body. It was the creepiest thing I have ever experienced. I obviously made my husband get up to check it, but there was nothing there. Needless to say I didn't get much sleep that night and the lamp stayed on. One last thing, on the Monday following this I watched the same shadow walk up the stairs while I was sitting on the couch. I am sure that this shadow is the same as the old man who died in this house in the late 70s. The man was not happy in life and drank all the time, abused his kids, etc. I'm not sure who or what is outside our window though, because the shadow is tall where the thing outside the window is shorter. Anyways, thanks for reading about our recent experiences. Next up at number 2 now we have the blue body. This one came from Reddit user Shanae Smith and definitely left me with more questions than answers. They said, okay, so when I was 11 years old my house burned down at Christmas. While we were rebuilding that house my family rented out a farmhouse around 10 minutes away. This farm had about 40 acres, 10 of which was a grassy field and the rest of the 40 acres were all forest. Our landlord told us that the forest used to be a paintball field but he had to stop because dumb kids were shooting his cows. Anyway, I was about 12 and my best friend came over. We were just messing around in the barns and decided to walk out and explore the forest. It took us a long time to get across the field and we had to get through some prickles and barbed wire fence until we could actually walk through the forest. We walked away a while before we found anything actually interesting. We found some old little shacks covered in spray paint and moss. Most were filled with beer cans and random pieces of clothing. We found some very strange things there. Anyway, we were walking and climbing around all these things and all was going well when I heard my friend scream. It wasn't one of those joking "I'm gonna spook you" screams either. I shut up and ran over to her and I looked towards what she was looking at and there it was, kind of hard to see, but tied up to a tree maybe 10 meters away was a mangled blue body. We didn't stay to investigate. We both booked it as fast as we could back to the house. We didn't even care about the prickles. We got sliced up pretty bad. When we got to the house panting and sweating we both started crying uncontrollably and told my mom everything. She called the police and they arrived shortly. They went out to investigate and an officer came back to tell us that it was just a rotting mannequin tied up. But they did find 7 dead bodies where the old road had washed out in previous months. He thanked us and that was the end of that. And finally number 1 now we have the rocking chair. We're finishing now on a story from Reddit user Lover. Great name. It's a scary story that actually spans 2 generations. They said my grandma's is a very stereotypical horror movie house. Small Midwest town, white and old looking home on a farm. She even has a chipped wooden Mother Mary nativity in the front yard. The worst is she has a cemetery about a half a mile down the road. Anyways, I used to sleep in the room in the corner of the top floor and it had a wooden rocking chair in it. When I was younger I would wake up because I thought I heard it rocking, to the point where I would wake up my grandma and I have to stay in her room. Well, about 10 years later my mom, aunt and I during Thanksgiving were talking about how creepy grandma's house was. My aunt goes on to talk about how when she was younger the reason my mom and her ended up sharing a room was because she thought her room was haunted. She said she woke up one morning and the rocking chair was about 2 feet closer to her bed and after that night it would start rocking on a nightly basis around midnight.
Starting off things like we always do, in at number 10 we have the old Arnold estate. This farmhouse became infested with strange paranormal paranormal activities in the 70s, and it lasted for over a decade. The Perron family bought the house and moved in shortly after with their family. But the previous homeowner left them with one piece of advice: leave the lights on at night. I mean, what the heck is going to go on at nighttime? Well, the Perron family quickly learned that they weren't the only ones living in this farmhouse. They were visited by disturbing spirits who used to live in the house before them. These spirits weren't evil to begin with, but as the family spent more time in the old farmhouse, the spirits started to misbehave. One of the most infamous evil spirits that occupied this house was Bathsheba Sherman. This spirit would have violent and angry outbursts, and most times she would injure the Perron family. Once the family decided to move out, the paranormal activities didn't stop. The new family that moved in said that the house is full of blue orbs and strange mist would rise from the floorboards. Furniture and objects would move on their own, and doors would slam shut in the middle of the night. These hauntings were actually the inspiration for the movie The Conjuring. Sounds like to me that this farmhouse is in desperate need of a cleanse, or it needs to be torn down. Either way, I'm not going to be visiting this farm anytime soon.
At number 9 we have The Bride. One thing that I've learned after doing all these top 10 scary videos is never mess with a bride on her wedding day unless you want her to stir up some evil that will never take a day off. The legend of the bride is a classic one. Two young lovers who are forbidden to be together. They run away and set themselves up to be married on a secluded farm. But their parents catch up with them, the young boy is taken away to be hung, and then the young girl is shot and killed by her father in her wedding dress on the spot. My god, dude, do you know how long it takes to pick out a dress? Well, her spirit rose up because no one messes with a special girl on her special day. Now it haunts farms looking for her lost love and killing any man who dares to get in her way. At number 8 we have Baby Under the Stairs. Just off the title you should have goosebumps already. Anything living under the stairs makes me think of a basement dwelling monster that just wants to drag you into some hovel and eat your guts. This story follows a kid who would visit his grandparents' farm every summer. He would always have a great time, he was very close with his grandparents. But one thing that would always make him uneasy is how every night his grandparents' dog would just bark at the barn like there was something in there. The dog would just sit outside of the barn in front of these concrete steps that would lead into the barn and just snarl. Snarl so hard it's like there was some sort of creature inside of there. One day this young kid was going through some old family photos with his grandma. Looking at all the old pictures of his parents, he came across a baby picture that he didn't recognize. His grandma told him that this was a picture of his aunt. She passed away when she was only a baby, and they had a funeral for her, and then they buried her body under the steps leading into the barn. Ooh. At number 7 we have Myrtle's Plantation in Louisiana. This legend was actually researched by National Geographic. So Nat Geo came to this old plantation to take some pictures, and much to their surprise, there was an unexpected person in one of their shots. This was seen in the window. She is said to be the ghost of a young girl who is a slave on the plantation. Now she gets her revenge by photobombing white people's photos. Now she gets her revenge by scaring the hell out of white people by photobombing their photos. At number 6 we have Man of the Marsh. Some farms perform superstitious ceremonies to help protect them from the Man of the Marsh. You would take clover and rose and grind it up and rub it on the entrance to your house. If you fail to do this, you might be visited by the Man of the Marsh. Picture a Swamp Thing but wearing a flannel coat. That's basically it. You would know he came to visit you from the wet footprints he left behind and the haunting sight of an empty bed. Ooh. At number 5 we have El Chupacabra. Now we get to go to Mexico, baby. Pour me a tequila and someone throw some lime on ceviche. We're gonna party. But we're also gonna look out for El Chupacabra. This dude is basically a Mexican werewolf with a better name. He roams around the desert looking for small farms, and when he finds one, you better hope you didn't leave your livestock out because he's about to ruin your whole career. El Chupa's gonna come in and suck the blood out of all your goats until he's satisfied. And then you're gonna end up with a bunch of bloodless goats, and we all know that goats are best with blood inside their body. And he eats kids too, if he wants to. I mean, kids just eat, yell, and crap. They're basically goats without the cool beards. So if you're trying to get rid of a kid, just take it to a farm in Mexico and let El Chupacabra take care of it for you. And if you ask where you got this idea from, it wasn't me. At number 4 we have The Licked Hand. Gross. If you live on a farm, you probably have a dog. The dog does a lot of things. It lets you know when people are coming, it helps herd animals. And it's just nice to have around for a good friend and a good time. This urban legend is about a girl who lived on a farm and would lay in bed late at night and leave her door open for her dog to come in. The dog would lay next to her bed and lick her hand. and then she would slowly fall asleep. This would happen so often that she would never even check to see if it was her dog, she just already knew. One day she wakes up and her dog is missing. Her whole family goes looking for the dog, and then they find him, dead. Something had killed their dog. The family mourned that night, and then the girl went to bed. This time she slept with her door closed, feeling too heartsick to leave the door open. But when she draped her hand off the bed, something started to lick it. Ugh. At number 3 we have the HINTERKAIFECK murders. It's 1922 in Germany. World War I is wrapped up and the Germans have taken a big L on that one. Everyone is probably still feeling the effects of getting their ass handed to them on a global scale. And a little family living on a farm hasn't been heard from for days. Someone goes to investigate, and what they found was one of the most horrific murder scenes known. An entire family and their maid was brutally murdered with a blunt force weapon. Each one of them, including their 2-year-old baby, had been beaten to death and then hidden in the farmhouse. This might have just been a psycho killer cascade, but something very creepy about this is that there was a maid who was working there just 2 weeks before, and she quit because she said that the farm was plagued by evil spirits. And who or whatever killed these people took care of the livestock after the people were killed. There were signs that all the animals had been looked after each one of the family members met the grave. At number 2 we have the old Arnold estate. If you buy a house from someone and they tell you you should leave the lights on at night, just move out right away. Right off the bat, your electrical bill is going to be stupid high if you have to leave the lights on all night. And what could be so horrible in the house that it makes you keep the lights on? I've never heard the story of turning your lights off at night and then Scarlett Johansson comes to visit you in your sleep and gives you $100. No, that's not one of them. Well, the Prawn family moved into this estate, they got this warning and still decided to stay. And then stuff started going crazy. They would see blue orbs fly through the house, furniture would get moved, mist would rise from the floorboards, and a ghost named Sherman would get violent with the family. I think after that, they moved out. At number 1 we have the blue body. A family was renting a farmhouse while their new home was being built. One day the youngest girl in the family and her friend decided to do a little exploring. They were walking through the bushes when they came across a dead body tied to a tree. Obviously this scared the hell out of the 2 girls, so they sprinted back to the house. When they got home, the little girl told her mom what they had just found, and the little girl's mom called the police. The body was that of a mannequin, so you shouldn't freak out. What should freak you out is that there was 7 dead bodies buried around the mannequin, one of which was an old resident of the house they were staying in.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the HINTERKAIFECK murders. On April 4th, 1922, a search party went out to investigate the HINTERKAIFECK farm in Germany. The neighbours of the farm had not heard from the family who lived there in quite a while, and the children hadn't showed up for school. What they found horrified them. In the barn, they found 4 ravaged bodies covered with hay. Inside they found the bodies of 2-year-old Joseph and the family's maid. The maid was actually new to her position there. She had replaced the last maid who left because she firmly believed that the house and the farm was haunted. The autopsies revealed even more horrors. The mother showed signs of strangulation and had 7 blows to her head. The husband was caked with blood and his cheekbones were sticking out through shredded flesh. Their widowed daughter, Victoria, had her skull smashed in and her head had 9 star-shaped wounds from a blunt object. Victoria's 7-year-old daughter seemed to have remained alive for several hours after her attack and had ripped her own hair out for some reason. Victoria's 2-year-old son had been killed with a heavy blow to his face, while the maid had died from a blunt force. Here's the creepiest part: the farm animals all around the house were all tied up but unharmed. Not only that, they had been looked after between the time of the murders and the discovery of the bodies. That means whatever or whoever killed the family actually lived at the farm with the bodies there for at least a few days, looking after the animals. To this day, the murders remain unsolved. The full story has many more grisly details to this almost century-year-old murder mystery.
And now at number 9, we're going to be talking about Monte Cristo Homestead. This farm was built in 1876 by a husband and wife. This farmhouse was built in 1876 by a husband and wife who wanted to start their own new lives together in Australia. The family had a great life until one day when their maid dropped their baby down a flight of stairs, killing her instantly. The maid swore that an invisible force pushed the baby out of her hands. The husband and wife died inside of the house shortly after, and now it is believed that their spirits haunt the farm. Visitors report that they can hear footsteps and voices telling them to leave. Young children also feel suddenly agitated and scared whenever whenever they're near the stairs. The current homeowners say that they feel like they're living with another family, but you just can't see them. Well, you can't see them most of the time. I mean, no, this isn't for me. If I lived there, I would put this house up for sale as soon as possible, and I would take whatever the offers are. There's no way in hell I would share my house with angry ghosts. The Dandy house comes into this list next up at number 8. James Link and his family purchased a farmhouse, and they couldn't wait to move in. Once they drove their moving truck onto the property, their neighbor came out yelling and said, "What are you doing here? You can't move in here." That's not the kind of neighborhood welcome I would want to receive. But anyways, the neighbor told them about Dandies. They were the family that used to live inside of the farmhouse. The Dandies had witnessed a series of unexplained events. They reported hearing strange chants, and they even saw the bricks from a chimney being removed by invisible hands. They even said that they could feel a burn on their bodies, and there's a male spirit dressed in a plaid shirt and blue jeans who holds a rifle at the end of the bed. Well, that would be enough for me to move out. The Dandy house is still a popular ghost hunting location, but for me, I wouldn't step a foot into that place. A haunted barn comes onto this list in at number 7. This is known as a Von Klein-Schmidt legend, and it goes something like this. A dairy farmer was helping his prize cow give birth when all of a sudden, the barn just burst into flames. He ran out to get his family to help him move the livestock out of the barn, but the whole thing quickly became engulfed in flames, and the family knew that they were in a lot of trouble. They stood in the middle of the barn holding each other as they were waiting to die. The neighbors could see the family inside of the barn yelling and crying for help, but there was nothing that anyone could have done. The next family to own the barn had a similar tragedy. They bought a bunch of cows, but a week later, they all got sick and died. The farmer had no idea what was going on, so he called the vet to come in to make sure that the cows didn't have an infectious disease. But the vet couldn't come up with a logical explanation. It seemed almost like the cows died from just being scared to death. The farmer didn't want to take any more chances, so he sold the barn because of all the supernatural things that's been happening there and all of the terrible things that have happened before. Yeah, I would say that's a pretty good decision, my friend, because something weird's going on that's killing your livestock. A White House farm murders brings us to number 6. These murders took place in Essex, England in 1985. A husband and wife were shot and killed inside of their farmhouse, along with their adopted daughter and their twin boys. The only survivor was their adopted son, and he was Jeremy Bamber, who was 24 years old at the time. Apparently Jeremy was at home a few miles away when the shooting took place. During the initial investigation, police ruled that this is a murder-suicide because they believed that the schizophrenic daughter shot and killed her family and then turned the gun on herself. But the tables turned when Jeremy's girlfriend confessed that he had shot his own family with the semi-automatic rifle, and that's because he wanted to get the large inheritance. So he made it look like his sister did all of the killing, but he was convicted of 5 counts of murder, and he was told that he would never be released from prison. I mean, how the hell do you murder your entire family for money? This guy deserves to rot in jail for the rest of his life. He should just be forgotten about. Or maybe stick him in that barn where all those cows were dying and just see what happens. Elvay Farm breaks onto this list at number 5. Elvay Farm is located in the most haunted village in England. The farm was built in 1406, and since then, spirits have been haunting the farm. A man named Robert de Boyce, while he used to live in the farmhouse, he was known to prey on local villagers centuries ago until he was caught for his crimes. Well, now it is believed that the creepy spirit roams the halls of this house, and he is known to grab people's hair, and they'll pull you in a room and slam the door shut. And then there's another spirit known as Edward Brett. Visitors can hear his spirit constantly whispering, "I will do it." Edward used to own his house until one day he walked to the dairy barn and shot himself. Well, apparently his ghost never left the farmhouse, and now the current owners say that they can still hear gunshots firing and Edward whispering. I would be whispering, is this real life right now? I would be totally freaked out. Scary Creatures pops onto this list at number 4. A farmer in Montana saw a weird looking animal approach his farm, so without any hesitation, he grabbed his rifle and shot him. What exactly did he shoot? Well, we're not really sure. Well, take a look at this thing. From far away, I guess you could say that it looks like a wolf, but once you get close up to it, the animal doesn't really look familiar at all. So experts were called in to identify the body, but they were stumped. They had no idea what that was. They were able to say that this creature comes from the same family as wolves and dogs, but they couldn't exactly figure out which species it actually belongs to. Once pictures of the dead animals popped onto the internet, people started to guess what the animal could be. Let me know what you guys think it is in the comment section below. A lot of people think it can be a dire wolf, or other people think that they can be like a severely malnourished bear. And then there was others who said that this could be like a dog man. I don't know whatever it is, but all I know is I don't want to run into anything that looks like that. Number 3 takes us to a farmhouse dungeon. I mean, that sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. A dungeon-looking room was found in a basement of this abandoned Pickering farmhouse located in Ontario, Canada, so not too far from where I live. The room was secured by a heavy door with several locks, and it seems like it was designed to trap someone inside. The room also had steel-linked chains hanging from the ceiling, a white bench, and 4 large water jugs. The person who found this room quickly notified the police, but the next day someone had already set this farmhouse on fire. Police became heavily involved with this case, and eventually they arrested a man named Robert White, who admitted that he had been working on this room for over a year, and he planned on kidnapping a woman and keeping her locked up inside his own makeshift dungeon. So this guy was married, he had 2 children, and I can't imagine what they must have thought when he confessed to the crimes. This whole thing happened like an hour from where I live, so it's so crazy to think that someone in your neighborhood could have been captured by this guy. A farmhouse horror takes us to number 2 on this list. A family was looking to buy a farmhouse because they needed a bigger place. They were expecting a new baby, and they thought a new life in the country would be best. So after about a month of living in this old farmhouse, things started to get really strange. The youngest daughter said that she could see a shadow figure lurking on the stairs, and they would stand next to her bed while she was trying to sleep. But of course she was told by her parents that they didn't believe her. But the next day, the mom was going downstairs and the shadow figure pushed her down. The mom hit her head on every step. Luckily, she survived, but that's not where the story ends. The little girl was having problems sleeping, and when she rolled over, the shadow figure was laying next to her. But his face was perfectly clear. He had red eyes, he was pale, he had scaly skin. While he went to reach for her face with his long fingernails, he ended up scratching her face so much that the little girl was left unrecognizable. The family left that night and never returned. It is said that this farmhouse is still up for sale, but no one has dared enter ever since. The farm murderer stabs his way into number 1 on our list. Robert Picton was a millionaire pig farmer from British Columbia, Canada. It seems like he had everything made, but he was hiding a dark secret. Robert Picton was actually a serial killer, and it is estimated that he murdered somewhere between 6 to 50 prostitutes from the Vancouver area. He would cut up their bodies and feed it to his pigs, but things got even more insane. He didn't just feed the bodies to the pigs, he would keep the heads, hands, and feet from some of his victims, and he would put them in his fridge. He also would throw some of them in a wood chipper for fun. Investigators also believe that he would combine human remains with pig parts and took them to a rendering plant in Vancouver to be processed into lipstick, shampoo, and soap. One of his victims managed to escape, but when she told the police what happened to her, they said that the evidence was circumstantial and that they couldn't arrest him. Is this real life right now? She was literally stabbed a bunch of times, and she can give you a full description because she was a prostitute, but you're not going to at least investigate the situation? Well, eventually Robert was arrested and sentenced to life in prison, but he was able to get away with these murders for a very, very long time.